Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Darren Wilcock, and this is Back to the Book. And today I'm going to get back to basics, I suppose, and ask the question, is the Bible the Word of God? And this is primarily for agnostics and atheists, but it should be a useful tool if you're a Christian and you've got agnostic and atheist friends. And it's just a series of questions, really, that to try and draw them out, try and draw out where they're coming from and what they really think. So I want to ask you something before we even get started. What would it actually take for you to believe that an ancient collection of texts, such as the Bible, was genuinely from God? And that's a serious question, so pause for a second. Have you ever actually thought about that? Because here's the thing, if your answer is nothing could convince me, then we're not having an intellectual conversation anymore. We're kind of having a faith conversation just on the other side of the aisle. But if someone's genuinely open, and I'll address the agnostics and atheists now, if you're the kind of person who follows evidence wherever it leads, would you follow it even when it makes you feel uncomfortable? And if that's the case, then good, stick around, because I'm not going to preach to you here. I'm going to ask you things, and by the end of this, you might find yourself asking some uncomfortable questions of your own, but in the end, they'll enlighten you. So what kind of evidence should we even expect? So let's start there. If God exists, and I know that's a big if for some of you, but humour me for a moment. If an all-knowing, all-powerful being wanted to communicate with humanity across thousands of years and dozens of cultures, for example, what would that look like? Would you expect a science textbook, a legal document with footnotes, a direct download into everyone's brain, Or, and here's a thought, would you expect something that fits with how humans actually learn, how humans grow and transmit important information? So think about it. How do we pass down what matters most? And often it's through stories, poetry, letters, laws, proverbs, and songs. And isn't it interesting that the Bible contains all of those? But let's get a bit more specific. What characteristics would we expect from a genuinely divine communication? Now, I'd suggest at least 3. So firstly, if it's genuinely divine, you want internal coherence across widely different authors, different times and different cultures. Second, you'd want some kind of external verification where it connects with history, archaeology, human nature even. And then I think if it's really a divine text or a collection of texts from the Creator, you'd think it would have some kind of transformative power that actually changes lives and societies. So I think that's fair criteria. So let's test them out. So let's look at the coherence problem, which actually isn't a problem, but it is something that should bother you, but probably not in the way you'd expect. So the Bible was written over approximately 1,500 years by about 40 different authors across 3 different continents in 3 languages, and those languages were Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek. And the authors come from different backgrounds. You had shepherds, kings, fishermen, doctors, tax collectors, tent makers, rabbis. Now, quick question. Have you ever tried to get 3 people to agree on something simple, like where to go for dinner? And yet, this collection of 66 books, the Bible, written across all those centuries, tells one continuous story with interlocking themes, progressive revelation, and a coherent theological framework. So how can it do that? Let me put it another way. If I gathered 40 random authors from different centuries, different cultures, different professions and trades, and asked them all to write about the nature of reality, the human condition and the ultimate purpose of life, what do you think I would get? And I think I'd probably get chaos, contradictions and complete incoherence. But that's not what we've got with the Bible. Now, some of you are going to shout out, but there are contradictions. Well, are there? Let's examine that, because here's something important. There's a big difference between a contradiction and a complexity, or a contradiction and a paradox even. There's a difference between an error and a tension that resolves upon closer examination. So I'll give you an example. Now, critics of the Bible often point to the resurrection accounts. So you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And they all tell the story slightly differently. There's different details, different emphases, different women at the tomb, for example. Now, here's my question for you. If you were a detective investigating a crime and 4 witnesses gave you identical statements word for word, would that make you more confident or less confident in their testimony? Less, I would presume you would answer, because that's evidence of collusion, not independent verification. And what we actually have in the Gospels is exactly what we'd expect from multiple independent witnesses to the same event. We've got agreement on the central facts, and then we've got variations in the peripheral or minor details. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's keep pulling this thread. So here's where things get genuinely weird. Now let me ask you, if I made a specific detailed prediction about something that would happen 500 years from now, and it came true exactly as I said, what would you conclude about me? Either I got incredibly lucky, or I had access to information you don't. Now multiply that by hundreds. So in the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament, they contain detailed prophecies about a coming Messiah. And these weren't written after the fact. You know, we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947, which confirm that these texts existed centuries before Jesus was born. Let's look at one example. In Isaiah chapter 53, this was written approximately 700 years before Jesus walked the earth, and it describes a suffering servant. And I'll read from Isaiah 53, 3-5, and it says, "He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." Now, question, what does that sound like? And here's where I think it gets a bit uncomfortable for the skeptic. This wasn't some vague Nostradamus style, a great leader will rise in the east type of prophecy. This is very specific. Pierced, despised, rejected, suffering for others' sins. So the standard atheist response might be, well, Jesus or his followers just manufactured events to fit the prophecies. Okay, let's think about that. Did Jesus arrange to be born in Bethlehem? And there's a prophecy about that in the book of Micah, chapter 5. Did he coordinate with the Roman government to ensure crucifixion, a specifically Roman execution method that didn't exist when the prophecies were written? Rather, what they had back then was Jewish stoning. Did he bribe the soldiers to cast lots for his garments? Another prophecy from Psalm 22. And, at what point does the conspiracy theory explanation become more implausible than the straightforward one? Now, I'm not saying this proves divine inspiration. I'm asking you, what would prove it? And to you. And if the answer is nothing, then who's operating on blind faith here? Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the Bible as a historical document. So for years, centuries in fact, critics claim that various biblical accounts were mythology, fairy tales. For example, there's a group of people called the Hittites, and people thought for centuries that was invented in the Bible. King David, people said, no, he didn't exist, it's just a legend. Even Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor that was in charge of Israel when Jesus was fulfilling his ministry. People claim that Pontius Pilate was probably fictional as well. And then the archaeologists started digging. So what about the Hittite civilization? It was discovered and extensively documented. What about King David? Well, in 1933, archaeologists found the Tel Dan stele. It's a 9th century BC inscription referring to the house of David. Pontius Pilate. In 1961, there's a limestone block was discovered at Caesarea Maritima with Pilate's name and title inscribed on it. And there's hundreds more examples of archaeological verification. Now, does this prove that everything in the Bible is historically accurate? Not necessarily, but here's my question. If the Bible were just a collection of myths made up by ignorant Bronze Age shepherds, for example, why does it keep getting verified rather than falsified? Think about it. Every other ancient religious text makes historical claims that archaeology has contradicted. Take the Book of Mormon, and that describes a massive civilizations in North America that left zero archaeological evidence. Various Hindu texts describe geography and places that just doesn't match reality. Just 2 examples, but there's a lot more in other religious texts. But what about the Bible? So the thing is, the more we dig, literally, in a sense, the more the archaeologists dig, the more we find that its historical details check out. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe we should ask ourselves why this particular ancient text or collection of texts has or have such an impressive track record in that sense. Okay, let's just switch themes for a second. Let's get a bit personal, right? So let's say the Bible's just a human book, a collection of ancient Near Eastern mythology, mixed with some historical fragments, nothing special. Here's my question. Why has it worked? And what do I mean by worked? Well, what I mean is, why has this particular book, more than any other text in human history, consistently transformed people in communities and entire civilizations? I mean, you might answer, well, lots of ideas spread. That doesn't make them true. And that's a fair point. But there's something different happening here. For example, the Greek and Roman religions didn't transform their worshippers' moral lives. They didn't create hospitals, orphanages, and universities. They didn't inspire the abolition of slavery, the elevation of women's status, or the development of human rights concepts. The philosophers talked about these things. The Christians did them. And they did them because of this book, the Bible. And you can trace the abolitionist movement directly to people reading the Bible. And particularly passages like Galatians 3:28, which says, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And you can trace the development of modern science to people who believed, because of this book, that the universe was created by a rational, intelligent God, and was therefore rationally capable of endowing the universe with intelligent design, for instance. And here's the question that should worry every atheist. If the Bible's just a human invention, why has it produced such disproportionate results? We're not talking about a religious text that made people feel nice. We're talking about a text that fundamentally reshaped human civilization multiple times on multiple continents across multiple centuries. Either this book contains something genuinely transcendent, or it's the luckiest accident in human history. Which seems more probable to you? Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. You might be saying to yourselves, well, sure, the Bible's had influence, but so have other books, the Quran, the Communist Manifesto, Harry Potter. Fair enough, but let me ask you something. Can you name another text that has all of these characteristics simultaneously? So, for example, written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors with remarkable coherence. It contains hundreds of specific prophecies that demonstrably come true. It's consistently verified rather than falsified by archaeology. It's transformed more lives and civilization than any other text in history. It survived more attempts at destruction than any other book. It's been translated into more languages than any other book. And it still remains the best-selling book every year. Harry Potter's great, but it doesn't quite tick all those boxes, does it? Here's the point. The Bible isn't slightly more remarkable than other books. It's in a category by itself. And at some point, you have to ask why. So let me speak directly to the skeptics for a moment. Now, I respect intellectual honesty, I really do. And I think genuine intellectual honesty requires you to ask yourself some uncomfortable questions. So I'll put a few to you. Question 1, have you actually read the Bible? Not snippets, not memes, not out of context verses people use to mock it. Have you actually sat down and read a complete part of it? For instance, the Gospel of John from beginning to end. And if not, how confident can you really be in your rejection of it? Second question, what would it take for you to believe that a text was divinely inspired? And if your answer is nothing, then you've ruled out the possibility a priori. That's not evidence-based reasoning. That's philosophical presupposition masquerading as skepticism. Third question, are you rejecting the Bible based on evidence or based on what you want to be true? Because here's the uncomfortable reality. If the Bible is true, it makes demands on your life. It tells you that you are not the final authority. It tells you that there's a God to whom you're accountable. So is it possible, just possible, that your rejection has got more to do with not wanting it to be true than with the actual evidence? Now, I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying it because genuine self-examination requires us to ask hard questions about our own motivations. So where does this leave us? I haven't proven that the Bible's the word of God in this video. That wasn't my goal. You can't prove something like that the way you can prove a mathematical theorem. But I hope I've done something more important. I hope I've shown you that the case for the Bible being divinely inspired is far stronger than you might have assumed. That there are genuinely puzzling features of this book that demand explanation. That dismissing it as just ancient mythology requires ignoring a lot of inconvenient evidence. And I hope I've asked you some questions that stick with you. You know, why does this book cohere, or why is it coherent when it shouldn't be? Why do its prophecies keep coming true? Why does archaeology keep verifying it and not falsifying it? Why does it transform more lives than any other book in history? And why is it in a category completely by itself? My final question, what if you're wrong? What if this ancient collection of text really is what it claims to be, a genuine communication from the creator of the universe to humanity? What would that mean for your life? What would that mean for how you spend your time, your resources, your relationships? What would that mean for where you're headed? Now, I'm not asking you to believe blindly. I'm asking you to investigate honestly. Read the Bible for yourself. Start with the Gospel of John. See if it reads like mythology or like eyewitness testimony. Ask the hard questions. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it's somewhere uncomfortable. Because the truth matters more than our comfort. And if there's even a chance that this book contains the words of God himself, isn't that worth investigating? So thanks for sticking with me. Sorry about that. Thanks for sticking with me. Probably some of you want to stick me. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I know it has a lot of questions and not a lot of easy answers necessarily, but that's kind of the point. You know, the most important things in life rarely come with simple sort of bumper sticker solutions. And if this made you think, even if you disagree with every word I've said, then it was worth your time, because I'm here to make you think. I'm here to try and open up your mind to the possibility of just a few things: the existence of God, and does he communicate through the Bible? So drop a comment below, tell me where I'm wrong, tell me what questions I missed, and let's keep the conversation going. And if you're genuinely curious, if this stirred something in you, maybe it's time to pick up that dusty Bible on your shelf and actually read it. You might be surprised what you find. So thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe if you haven't, give us a like if you like this, and I'll see you soon.